from Abuja.
Hello, thank you for being a part of our show. We appreciate you. I'm Magnus Kpakol, and this is Magnus Kpakol GVA. As always, it's all about how we can raise the level of living. That's what it's all about. In view today, the complex story of poverty in Africa. Why has poverty been so resistant in Africa? We will look at a few video footages to attempt to weigh the issue. But before that, in our hidden economics, can women power rescue Africa? Now, up next in our quick view, we rank countries by female education. That's coming right up. It is very clear that women in poor countries tend to have very low levels of education. It is clearly a primary reason why Africa has failed to be as globally competitive as it would have been expected, given its huge population. Indeed, 9 out of the top 10 most difficult nations for girls to be educated are in sub-Saharan Africa. Afghanistan, which has the highest level of gender disparity in primary school, is the only non-African country to make the list, ranking in the 4th place. In this connection, how many African countries are among the top 40 countries in the world in the average number of years spent in school by women between 25 and 34 years of age? 0, 2, 3, and 4. Which of the following African countries ranks among the toughest places in the world for a female to get an education? Burkina Faso, Central African Republic, Chad, and South Sudan. Stay with us for our answers coming up shortly. Still in view, the complex story of African poverty. But up next in our hidden economics, women power to the rescue. Strong Girl, a beautiful and powerful song produced by Godfather Productions for One.org. Apparently, we need to help women to be strong if Africa is indeed to rise sustainably. Too often, women limit themselves by thinking they cannot do it. But yes, they can. Firstly, what is the main source of oppression for women of Africa? And can they rise from it? Now, if women cannot rise, Africa will not rise. For Africa to rise out of poverty, mothers, who obviously are women, have to be better educated and equipped to make their contribution. To marginalize 50% of a society is to demonstrate a pitiful condition of a poor level of civilization and advancement. Africa needs not only technological change, but a larger pool of people to accumulate capital and new ideas for economic growth and shared prosperity. Research is showing that the principle of male supremacy is the engine of the oppression of many African women. Unfortunately, any male supremacy that reduces or diminishes women in Africa perversely diminishes Africa and therefore the men of Africa in the wider world. Sometimes it appears that women in Africa have been fooled into thinking that they must acquire a certain manhood to compete with the boys. Do they need manhood to come tops in academics, in technology, or science, or medicine? Did Ellen Sirleaf, who just won the Mo Ibrahim Award as a meritorious African leader, have to change into a man to rule Liberia? She completed her term as a strong and very feminine woman. The great Beyoncé, Oprah Winfrey, and many others have rocked and wowed the world. We need more female political leaders across Africa, and definitely in Nigeria. Our culture has to become more dynamic and updated to accommodate this, so that women can indeed be strong and come to the rescue. Our hidden economics for you.
Us women were shining like stars, start from the bottom and rise from the top. You're wonderful, loving and strong. Nothing is stronger than a woman's worth. I'm the piece of the puzzle that's missing, baby. I compete in the earth. Call me Sheba, but just come and marry my Keba. See, we run the world. Show some love to a strong girl.
Before we start our discussion, here are our quick view answers. 0. That's the number of African countries that rank among the top 40 nations in the world in terms of the average number of years spent in school by women 25 to 34 years of age. South Sudan has the worst record for educating girls, as 73% of girls do not go to primary school, and the government spends just 2.6% of its total budget on education, compared to about 26% often recommended for developing countries. Nigeria's federal government allocates about 7% of its budget to education. Reduced waste in other sectors can raise this number. For comments, adverts, and sponsorship, please see our information displayed on the screen. In View Today, let us look briefly at the complex story of poverty in Africa. Please join us as we present brief discussions from experts. We start with Jeffrey Sachs in his strategy to end poverty in Africa. According to Jeff Sachs, as we will see, there are categories of investments that can help to reduce extreme poverty in Africa. Professor Jeffrey Sachs is an American economist and director of the Earth Institute at Columbia University.
I think it's fair to say that we would want to look at 4 categories of investment in Africa for that breakthrough. The first is in rural development, especially to spur agricultural development. The second is in the urban areas. Africa, throughout its history, has been predominantly rural, but it's fast urbanizing, and therefore productive, dynamic cities that can meet the needs of their populations is crucial. The third category, broadly, I would say, is the national infrastructure, the road network, the rail network, the power grids, the management at large scale of water resources. Because Africa historically has been bereft of the vital infrastructure that it needs for national or regional development. And the fourth big category that I would bid us to look at is demography. And that is the challenge of Africa's still very, very fast population growth. It all tells us that a high priority for Africa to break out of extreme poverty is to invest in its smallholder farmers with government programs that enable even the poorest farmers to get the inputs that they need, whether on credit or as a grant, so that they can have higher yields, higher income, and thereby start investing in these crucial inputs. And then peasant farmers stuck in poverty can become commercial farmers, earning a good income and then using a part of that improved income to keep making the investments in soil nutrients, in water management, and in improved seed varieties.
Good job, Professor Sachs. Now we'll listen to our own Emeka Anyankwu, former Secretary General of the Commonwealth. He discusses effective leadership for national growth. Chief Anyankwu tries to highlight qualities a leader should have to take his nation and the people to a state of full development.
Effective leadership for national growth and development must include on the part of the leader capacity for prudent management of resources, capacity for effective communication, capacity for power sharing or delegation, capacity to motivate both lieutenants and followership, capacity for goal setting and periodic review and adjustment of the goals, capacity to engineer qualitative leadership or elite recruitment, and the capacity for ensuring human or people-centered policies. Nigeria has its peculiar national circumstances, but it shares many of these national circumstances with countries like Malaysia and Indonesia. In the early 1960s, Nigeria and these Asian countries, including South Korea and Singapore, were at a similar stage of national development. But now, apart from Singapore, which has progressed from third world to the first, Malaysia, South Korea, and Indonesia have long surpassed Nigeria, thanks in the main to their leadership. Nigeria's needs in terms of leadership and good governance must include on the part of the leader, who at present happens to be President Buhari, the ability to prudently harness or apply the nation's human and material resources, deliver on national security, combat corruption, ensure thorough and far-reaching infrastructural transformation through the provision of power, education, health and transportation, and effectively deal with the challenge of revamping our national economy through its diversification.
Richard Dowden is the director, Royal African Society. As he puts it, development in Africa has become so difficult. He argues that some of the core problems of underdevelopment can be traced to an overlay of new states on old societies. He believes that the perception of politics by the people in Africa is also affecting growth in Africa.
I don't think there's a single answer, but the one that I think is the most important factor is it's the politics. You know, to misquote Bill Clinton, it's the politics, stupid. And that goes back to the colonial project, the way Africa's societies, between 6,000 and 10,000 political units that existed pre-colonial times, were carved up by outsiders, simply drawing lines on maps and, you know, between Germany, France, Britain, saying, right, that bit's your bit, that's bit, we'll put the line there, often dividing whole societies. And these states have got, Nigeria, for example, 400 languages, 400 separate languages and counting. I mean, that's what we're talking about. Maybe as many or more centers of old political power. So it's the overlay of these new states on old societies. And states that had, those societies had no part in their creation at all. They were just created and then handed over to them suddenly in the 1950s and 60s. You're independent now, off you go. And to think you can create a nation state like that was always madness. So it is the evolution of those societies that I think is it'll take a lot of time. It'll take generations for those nation states to create the sort of feeling of citizenship that Americans have or British people have. And so I just don't think, I think that's the core of the failure of development. Lots of countries going along nicely, suddenly huge political upheaval, maybe even civil war, all destroyed. Everybody flees, the money shifts out. And I think that's one. And I think the other one, which is closely linked to it, is that Africa's politics have fallen into the hands of elites, as the Nigerians would call them. These are a class of people who are pure business politicians. And business and politics go together in Africa. You cannot stand as a poor man. I came across a wonderful example the other day from Kenya, where a man who cycled around on a bicycle was trying to get himself elected, and the people just laughed at him and they say, "You've only got a bicycle. What can you do for us? We need a big man with a big car with money. That's the politician we need to." So there's this mentality, which I think has allowed a very small group of people to take over those countries politically, but also economically. And that's why you have something like, I think the World Bank says, between 60 and 70% of Africa's capital shifted out of the continent. It's in banks in Europe and Asia and maybe America as well. But these people just do what the colonialists did, which was suck the wealth out and shift it overseas. And until that changes, that is, until there's a new generation or even a revolution that actually takes power back to African people, I think those problems, that lack of development, will continue.
Maybe that's why there's so much poverty in Africa. World Bank statistics show that about 48.5% of the population of sub-Saharan Africa lives in poverty. Those living on less than $1.25 per day account for around 40%. In Nigeria, for example, in an attempt to end poverty, several programs have been implemented at various times. These have included Operation Feed the Nation, Directorate of Food, Roads, and Rural Infrastructure, Directorate of Employment, Family Support Program, and yes, something that used to be called National Poverty Eradication Program, NAPEP. Yet, nearly 115 million Nigerians still live in poverty today. So something must be done, and very aggressively. As I have said before, and very often, perhaps just focusing on only a few areas of deficiency is not enough to eradicate poverty. Focusing with synergy on multiple interrelated areas and simultaneously may do the trick. So let's cut to the chase. One of the most urgent tools required to fight poverty in Africa is education. Without education and literacy at the most basic levels, the chances of getting viable employment is almost non-existent. Then add to that great effort to promote girl-child education and the removal of any glass ceiling for corporate or public leadership for women. Any writhing culture that stifles the progress of women must be visited to make it more dynamic and responsive to collective human progress and shared prosperity. As we all know, northern and central states in Nigeria tend to have lower rates of education and literacy compared to those of southern Nigeria, according to the latest survey of the National Bureau of Statistics. This disparity must be addressed properly. However, implementation of programs to update culture and improve basic education alone will never be enough to end poverty anywhere. Focusing on cultural behavior and basic education without addressing a serious lack of basic health care, as Bill Gates has embarrassingly observed, is a problem. The people need to eat. Well, to eat, you need technological change, capital accumulation, training, efficiency, and other changes in attitude that will ensure that income levels rise equitably and for all. Do that, and food security is assured, with hunger banished. Poverty must end. It can be done. I'm Magnus Kpakol, and that's my view.
Adonai.